The sun hung low and mean in the Arizona sky, casting long shadows over the high desert. Sagebrush twitched in the dry breeze, and buzzards circled lazy in the thermals above. The earth was hard as iron, baked solid by years of drought, but that didn't stop Jack Carver from digging. He wasn't much to look at, just another dust-coated cowboy with worn boots and a beaten hat. A Colt .45 riding his hip like a second shadow. But Jack had a reason to dig. That land, though brittle and cracked, was supposed to hide something worth finding? The old prospector back in Tombstone had been half drunk and dying when he whispered it to Jack. Buried silver, boy, hidden deep. Apache land, I seen it. Jack didn't much care for tales told over whiskey and blood, but something in the old man's eyes had stuck with him like a thorn under the skin. So there he was, a day's ride from any town, on land most folks were wise enough to avoid. The locals said it was cursed, watched by spirits of the old tribes, protected by the dead. But Jack didn't believe in ghosts, only in what men were willing to kill for. He had been digging for hours, sweat mixing with dirt, his arms trembling with each swing of the shovel. The ground groaned, stubborn and dry, but Jack was too stubborn himself to quit. Then, suddenly, the shovel hit something hollow. Not rock, not earth, something else. Thud. He froze, knelt down and cleared the dust with his hands. A strange wood panel stared back at him. It was carved-aged, but still solid. Symbols etched into its surface, not in English. Apache. Jack's brows furrowed. A buried structure. He pressed his palm against the wood, felt a faint warmth beneath it. Without thinking, he pulled back his shovel and rammed it down. The panel splintered, gave way, and the earth beneath him collapsed like a rotten floorboard. Jack fell. Dust swallowed him whole, and he hit the ground hard, landing on his side. His hat flew off, and his gun dug into his ribs. For a moment, he just lay there, coughing, trying to blink the grit from his eyes. Then he heard breathing, soft, steady. Human. Jack reached for his revolver. Fingers slick with sweat. He rose to a crouch, peering through the dim light filtering down through the hole he'd made. It was a shelter, simple but carefully constructed. Walls of woven reed and hide, a fire pit cold with ash, earthen jars lined in the corner. And there, sitting cross-legged by the far wall, was a woman, an Apache woman. She was older, her face lined like the land outside, eyes deep and unreadable. She wore traditional dress, her hair in a single long braid draped over her shoulder. She didn't move, didn't scream, just stared at him like she had expected him all along. Jack lowered his weapon, unsure if he was seeing a ghost. "Ma'am," he rasped. Still, she said nothing. Finally, she spoke, her voice low, like wind through canyon stone. "This land was not meant to be broken." Jack shifted his weight. I didn't know anyone lived here. I didn't mean to. You dug where the dead sleep." Silence stretched between them, thick and dry. Jack could hear his own heart beating in his chest. "Are you alone?" he asked carefully. The woman nodded once. "I am the last, widow to Red Bear, mother to none, keeper of the old ways." Jack swallowed. There was something eerie about her calm, the way she held her posture, unmoved by his intrusion. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "I'll leave. I didn't mean harm." The woman stood slowly, her eyes never leaving his. "You cannot undo what's been broken, cowboy. The spirits will know your scent now." That made Jack's blood run cold. He'd heard stories, campfire tales of skinwalkers, ghosts that followed trespassers, men who vanished in the desert without a trace. He never put stock in him, until now. He looked up through the hole he'd fallen through. The sky was dimming, the sun sinking fast. He needed to climb out, needed to get back to his horse. But when he turned back to say something more, the woman was gone. No footsteps, no rustle, just empty air. Jack Carver stood alone in the silence, surrounded by ancient walls, the past pressing in around him, above him. This sky-burned orange and night was coming fast. The desert night wrapped around Jack like a cold blanket, heavy with the scent of sage and dry earth. He climbed from the hole, dust clinging to his shirt and trousers. His mind tangled with the strange encounter beneath the ground. The sun was gone now, swallowed by the horizon, leaving behind a sky stitched with stars that seemed indifferent to his troubles. Jack's horse, a scruffy bay named Whiskey, nickered softly nearby, pawing at the ground. Jack rubbed the back of his neck, feeling the weight of 1,000 questions pressing down on him. That Apache widow's words echoed in his mind. "You cannot undo what's been broken." He shook his head. In all the years of wandering the frontier, he'd faced rattlesnakes, rustlers, and worse, but ghosts and curses. That wasn't his world. Still, there was something about the place that didn't sit right. He pulled out a small flask, took a long swallow of whiskey, and exhaled slowly. He'd spent the day digging, hoping for silver or gold. But all he'd found was an old shelter and a mystery wrapped in silence. Back in town, he'd have shrugged it off, told a tale or two around the fire to keep the others entertained. But here, under the vast sky, the feeling gnawed at him. He swung onto Whiskey's back and urged the horse into a slow trot toward the trail leading back to the nearest settlement, Fort Apache, some 30 miles away. The moon was a silver crescent, casting ghostly shadows across the rocky terrain. Jack's mind wandered back to the woman. What did she mean by keeper of the old ways? Was she a witch? A guardian? Or just a lonely soul clinging to the last thread of her people's fading history? As the trail twisted and dipped through the desert hills, Jack spotted flickering light ahead campfires, no doubt, from a group of settlers or prospectors. He headed toward it, hoping for company and some answers. When he reached the fire, the men looked up with wary eyes, rough faces, weathered by sun and hardship. One of them, a tall grizzled man with a scar slicing across his cheek, stepped forward. "What you doing out here, stranger?" he growled. "Digging," Jack said, nodding toward the east. "Found something I didn't expect." The scarred man grunted. "Old Apache lands. You know better than to poke around there." "I didn't know anyone was still living out there," Jack said, "till I fell through into a shelter." The men exchanged uneasy glances. "Shelter?" another asked. "You sure it wasn't a cave?" "No," Jack said. "Woven walls. Fire pit. Someone was living there. Just not a soul I've met before." The fire crackled as silence stretched. The scarred man lit a cigar, the glow briefly illuminating his face. "That'd be Mary Redbear," he said quietly. Jack raised an eyebrow. "Apache widow," the man explained. "Husband was chief, killed in a raid years back. She's been out there alone since, keeping the old ways alive. Folks around here say she's got a way with spirits, that she talks to the dead." Jack's hand went instinctively to his gun. "Sounds like the kind of trouble I don't want," Jack muttered. The scarred man shrugged. "She's harmless, mostly, but she don't like strangers digging up her land." Jack looked back toward the east, where the sky had turned a deep indigo. "Maybe I should leave her be," he said, voice low. "But if there's silver out there, I'm not the only one who'll come digging." A tense silence fell. "Best be careful," the scarred man warned. "There's more than ghosts out here, who don't take kindly to trespassers." Jack nodded slowly, feeling the weight of the desert night pressing down on him. The land was alive with stories carved in stone, whispered in wind, and guarded by those who refused to forget. He poured the last of his whiskey into the fire, watching the flames flicker and die. Tomorrow, he'd have to decide: dig deeper, risk the wrath of old spirits and living enemies, or turn his back on the promise of buried fortune and ride away. But for now, the desert held its breath, and the ghosts of the past watched from the shadows. The first light of dawn cut through the desert like a sharpened blade, turning the sky a bruised purple before spilling gold across the rocky landscape. Jack Carver lay awake by the dying embers of the campfire, his thoughts tangled in shadows. The night's talk had settled deep in his bones, the name Mary Redbear echoing like a whispered warning. He didn't know much about the woman, only that she was a widow of an Apache chief, and that the land he'd dug into belonged to her. Jack had always been a man who trusted his gut, but something about this felt different, like the desert itself was telling him to be careful. He swung down from Whiskey's back, dust swirling around his boots. The horse nickered softly, sensing the unease in his rider. Jack scanned the horizon toward the spot where he'd fallen into the shelter. The earth cracked and silent beneath the morning sun. With a deep breath, he adjusted his hat and started walking. The trail was rough, rocky, and scarred by dry creek beds. His boots kicked up little puffs of dust with each step. The silence was absolute, only the distant cry of a hawk broke the stillness. Halfway there, Jack paused and pulled out a worn leather pouch from his belt. Inside was a small silver token, the only thing he'd found in the shelter besides the wooden walls. The token was engraved with symbols he didn't understand, but the craftsmanship was unmistakably native. As he neared the hole, Jack spotted fresh footprints around the edges. Not his own. Someone had been here recently. His hand dropped to his revolver, fingers tightening around the worn grip. He lowered himself carefully into the hole, the earth cool against his skin. The shelter was the same, still simple and bare, but now it felt charged with something, an energy that made the hairs on the back of Jack's neck rise. "Mary," he called softly. The silence stretched, heavy and full. Then, from the shadows near the far wall, a figure emerged. Mary Redbear. She was taller than he remembered, her dark eyes fierce and guarded. Her expression was unreadable, but there was a sadness behind it. like the weight of the world pressed down on her shoulders. "I told you this land was not for breaking," she said quietly. Jack straightened. "I didn't mean to disturb you." Mary's gaze pierced him. "You don't understand what lies beneath this ground. The spirits of my people watch over it." Jack frowned. "Spirits?" Mary's eyes flicked to the token in his hand. "That," she said, "belongs to my husband. Red Bear gave it to me before the raid that took him away." Jack's grip tightened. "I found it in the hole." Mary shook her head slowly. "The earth hides many secrets, Cowboy, some best left alone." Jack studied her face. The lines carved by years of loss and resilience. There was strength. There's something unyielding like the desert itself. "Why do you stay here alone?" he asked. Mary's voice dropped. "Because I am the last keeper. My people's ways die with me. The shelter is a sanctuary for the living, and for the dead." Jack swallowed. The weight of her words settled like a stone in his chest. Suddenly, the wind picked up, rattling the reed walls and carrying with it a faint whisper. Mary's eyes narrowed. "They come," she said, voice barely a breath. Jack's heart thudded. "Who?" "Those who would take what is not theirs. The greed that digs into the earth and leaves nothing but death behind." Jack looked out through the opening at the endless desert beyond. He'd come for treasure, for silver. But maybe there was something more here, something that couldn't be measured in dollars. Mary stepped closer, her hand resting briefly on the token. "You must leave," she said, "before the land demands a price." Jack met her gaze. Torn between his desire and the heavy truth in her warning, the sun climbed higher, casting sharp light on the ancient shelter and the cowboy caught between two worlds. Jack Carver didn't much like to back down from a fight. Grew up on a ranch where a man was measured by the grit in his teeth and the steady aim of his gun. But as he stared into the dark eyes of Mary Red Bear, something told him this was a fight unlike any he'd faced before. He left the shelter that morning with a heavy heart, the token burning in his pocket. He couldn't shake Mary's warning. The land demands a price. But neither could he shake the lure of what might be buried beneath the earth. The desert sun climbed unforgivingly overhead as Jack made his way back toward his camp, planning to dig just a little deeper, just enough to see if the silver was real. But fate, as it often does in the West, had other plans. From the ridge above, Jack spotted movement, a lone rider, kicking up dust against the horizon. The man rode hard and fast, the steady clip-clop of hooves echoing across the valley. Jack's hand instinctively went to his gun, eyes narrowing. The rider was dressed in black, from hat to boots, a long coat billowing in the wind. A rifle was slung across his back, and his face was hidden behind a dust-stained bandana. Jack's heart skipped a beat. Trouble. The rider circled down the slope and came to a halt near Jack's camp. "You Carver," the rider called out, voice rough as gravel. Jack nodded slowly. "Depends on who's askin'." The man dismounted and strode toward him, boots crunching on dry earth. "Name's Silas Kane," he said, eyes cold beneath a brimmed hat. "I'm looking for a silver claim. Heard you been poking around where you shouldn't." Jack squared his shoulders. "This land's been untouched for a reason." Silas laughed, a sound without humor. "Reason don't matter when there's money to be made." Jack's jaw clenched. "And what's it to you?" "Business," Silas said. "I'm a hunter, and I hunt what others can't or won't. I came for silver, but I'm also here for something else." Jack's eyes narrowed. "What's that?" Silas pulled a worn leather pouch from his coat and tossed it at Jack's feet. Inside lay a weathered photograph of Mary Red Bear and a group of Apache warriors, including a fierce-looking man with a braided beard. "Red Bear's kin," Silas said. "I'm here to settle old debts." Jack felt a cold knot tighten in his gut. "You want blood?" Silas shrugged. "More like payment. The past never stays buried." Jack looked at the photo again, then up at Silas. The sun baked the land between them, heat shimmering in the air. "Leave this place," Jack warned, "before it's too late." Silas smirked. "I don't scare easy." The tension crackled like gunpowder. Jack knew this was more than a fight over silver. It was a reckoning, old wounds reopening, and a battle for what the land truly belonged to. "Stay clear of Mary Red Bear," Jack said, voice low. "She's not what you think." Silas's eyes gleamed. "We'll see about that." With that, the hunter turned and mounted his horse, kicking up dust as he rode off toward the ridge. Jack watched him go, the weight of what was coming settling on his shoulders. The desert was silent again, but the quiet was filled with the promise of violence. He had a choice: dig deeper into the earth, or prepare for a fight that could cost him everything. Jack didn't flinch. This was the West, after all, where legends were born in blood and dust. Night had fallen like a velvet shroud over the desert, stars pricking the endless black sky. Jack Carver sat beside a crackling fire, the flickering flames casting long shadows on the rocky ground. Whiskey grazed nearby, ears twitching at every desert sound. The memory of Silas Kane's cold eyes haunted Jack. A hunter not just after silver, but after blood, a debt unpaid since long before Jack ever set foot in this god-forsaken land. Jack reached into his pocket, fingers closing around the silver token once more. The symbol of a past he barely understood but felt tightening like a noose around his neck. The distant hoot of an owl pulled Jack from his thoughts. He wasn't alone. A soft rustle caught his attention. From the darkness emerged Mary Red Bear, moving like a shadow. Her eyes held something fierce, a fire that matched the one burning in his chest. "You shouldn't be here," she said quietly, settling beside him. Jack shook his head. "I'm already in it, Mary. Silas Kane's coming, and he's not just after silver." Mary's jaw tightened. "I know. I've heard his name whispered among my people. He's the kind of man who doesn't stop until he's taken what he wants." Jack studied her face, scarred by grief but unbroken. "What do you want from me?" he asked. "To protect this land," she said simply. "To keep the old ways alive." Jack's eyes softened. "Then maybe we're not so different." Mary looked away, her voice dropping to a whisper. "My husband, Red Bear, died protecting this land. I vowed to keep his spirit safe, but with men like Silas coming, I fear the past will bleed into the present." Jack's hand found hers, rough fingers brushing against skin warmed by desert heat. "We'll face him together," Jack said. Mary nodded, a flicker of hope breaking through her guarded exterior. Before dawn, they set to work preparing traps and barricades around the shelter. Jack taught Mary how to handle his Colt, and she shared stories of her people's warriors and the sacred lands they defended. As the sun rose, the desert held its breath. Silas Kane appeared on the ridge, his rifle gleaming in the morning light. Behind him rode a band of men, eyes hard and cold. Jack and Mary stood side by side, ready to defend the land that had brought them together, Cowboy and an Apache widow, bound by fate and fire. The ground shook beneath their feet as the past and present collided in a deadly dance. The desert sun beat down with merciless heat as Silas Kane and his men rode into Apache Hollow, the sacred land Mary Red Bear had vowed to protect. Dust swirled around their horses' hooves, the sound of hooves pounding against the cracked earth echoing like a war drum. Jack Carver crouched behind a boulder, revolver drawn, sweat trickling down his sunburned face. Beside him, Mary's eyes burned with fierce determination, her hand steady on the old rifle she'd taken up to defend her home. They were outnumbered, outgunned, but the land was theirs and they knew every rock, every shadow, every whisper of the wind. Silas's voice rang out across the hollow, cold and taunting. "Mary Red Bear, this land belongs to the future, not the past. Step aside, or die like your husband did." Mary stood tall, voice strong as thunder. "This land belongs to the spirits of my people. You'll have to go through us first." The first shot cracked through the air, setting off a chain reaction of gunfire. Dust exploded into the sky as bullets ripped through sagebrush and stone. Jack fired with steady aim, picking off one of Silas's men before the others scattered to find cover. Mary crouched behind a fallen log, steadying her breath. She remembered the stories of her ancestors, the warriors who fought for every inch of this land with tooth and claw. A sharp crack sounded from above, a rifle bullet whistling past Jack's ear. He ducked, cursing under his breath. Silas Kane was a ghost in black, moving with ruthless precision. Jack knew this fight wasn't just about land or silver, it was about legacy, honor, and survival. Hours stretched on like a lifetime. The sun climbed high, then dipped low, shadows lengthening and twisting. At one point, Jack found himself face to face with Silas, their eyes locked, cold fire meeting steady grit. "End of the line, Cowboy," Silas sneered. Jack's fingers tightened on the trigger. Time slowed. 2 shots rang out, and both men staggered back, wounded but alive. Mary appeared, her rifle raised. "This ends now, Silas." The band of men hesitated, seeing their leader falter. With a fierce cry, Mary charged forward, her spirit a blazing wildfire. The men broke, fleeing into the desert dust. Jack helped Mary steady herself, the pain in his side forgotten. They stood alone amid the silence, the land around them holding its breath. Mary's voice was soft but resolute. "The spirits have judged tonight." Jack nodded, breathing heavy, "and they chose to protect their own." As the stars blinked awake overhead, Jack and Mary knew the battle was over, but the war for the soul of the land would never truly end. The desert night settled like a velvet cloak, cool against Jack Carver's sweat-damp skin. Around the dying embers of their fire, he and Mary Red Bear sat side by side. 2 souls bound by dust, blood, and the unforgiving land. The battle was over. Silas Kane and his men had fled, beaten back by a force neither guns nor greed could break. But the scars left by that day ran deeper than flesh. Mary traced a finger over the silver token in her hand, the last gift from her husband. Red Bear. It gleamed faintly in the firelight, a symbol of love and loss, memory and hope. "Do you think the land will ever forgive us?" Jack asked quietly. Mary's eyes, dark and deep as the night, met his. "The land doesn't forget, but it teaches us to live with what we carry." Jack nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle deep inside him. He had come searching for treasure but found something far more precious, connection to something bigger than himself. The desert stretched endlessly around them, a place of harsh beauty and silent stories. Here, the past was alive in every whisper of wind, every crack in the earth. Mary stood, her silhouette strong against the rising moon. "I will continue to protect this place, to honor those who came before." Jack stood too, tipping his hat. "And I'll ride on, carrying the story with me." As they parted ways at dawn, a newfound respect lingered between them, a bond forged in fire, shadowed by loss, and brightened by hope. Jack mounted Whiskey, the horse's breath steaming in the cool morning air. He glanced back once, to see Mary disappearing into the folds of the desert, a guardian of the old ways. The cowboy rode eastward, the promise of new horizons calling him onward. And somewhere in the desert's heart, the spirits of the land whispered their blessing, an eternal song of memory, endurance, and the wild, untamed soul of the West.